We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
So how do you find yourself involved with Paddington 2?
I was finishing one project at Framestore, and then slowly but surely was asked whether I'd be interested in working on Paddington 2, and then I said yes, and I then met Paul. I met Paul and Alexandra Ferguson, and had an initial meeting with them, and then it really started from there. And then I was sort of busy going out to Leavesden Studios, where we were in pre-production, and then went into shooting the film, and then into post-production, and then finished the film 10 days ago.
Blimey.
So, yeah.
Wouldn't have guessed. And there's a physicality to Paddington in that he's both animated, but he also looks enough like a real bear, not distracted. Yeah. What were the struggles of kind of balancing the two?
Well, I think it's, you've got to make sure that you strike the right balance of nuanced performance that people can really engage in, and it's a performance that's going to pull you through the film, as he is the lead character of the film. And I think then it's also, with Paul, sort of collaborating with Paul, we would make sure that there was enough moments where he behaves like a sort of scruffy little bear. That you have those really charming, endearing spots where you're just like, isn't he cute? But then at the same time, just the sort of slightly more ursine moments, maybe when he's like licking a barber's head or something like that. So I think it's just sort of weighing that sort of animal sort of instinct into this sort of like lovable little character.
And with that, how much of Paddington is Ben Whishaw, other than the voice? Was there any kind of motion capture, or is it all
we didn't do motion capture in that sense. It was much more sort of traditional kind of animation. But what we did do was film his dialogue records, so that we would use that a lot of the time as a sort of template or a base layer, if you like, for what the animation may become. But then it was, through many rounds of animation iterations with Paul and Pablo Grillo, the animation director, where we'd actually nuance the performance and get it to somewhere that Paul was really happy with. Sometimes we would go with Ben, but then sometimes we'd go off track slightly. We had a professional clown who was often recorded doing a lot of performance, which we then put some of that into his performance as well as often Paul performing out what he felt Paddington should do. And I think you can sometimes clearly see a little bit of Paul in some of the shots. Once you get to know Paul, you sort of can see some of that, and certainly in Paddington.
And just for a moment, can you talk about the kind of process of making it look almost like it's stop motion with the flip books, not the flip books, the pop-up books and all of that? And how did you achieve it genuinely looks like you filmed a pop-up book, and how difficult was that to achieve?
There was a lot of time spent on that, essentially. We worked quite closely with Gary Williamson, the production designer, before anything was shot of the pop-up book, and there was also a paper engineer that was brought on board. That there was a lot of toing and froing with sort of to what extent and sort of how many pieces there would be, so that we always had to bear in mind that there had to be room for these little bears to sort of maneuver through the pop-up sequence. So it was essentially a year or so in the making to get to realise that work. There was a lot of sort of dev under the scenes happening our side, so that we could really push the look of how the pop-up book would be realised once you're sort of in that almost macro-like photography. But essentially it was just, I think it was a labour of love by everybody involved, really, to make sure that it looked as real as possible.